Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy podcast. This is Chris Muntz, and this is episode 61. Give Me Some Humanity with Will Todd. I want you to stick around for this thought-provoking and jovial conversation in which Will and I discuss, among many things, a comparison of the US and UK education paradigms, his approach to the creative process, and the possible pitfalls of training sight-reading machines. While this last item can result in singers with world-class ability, it can also result in performances that at times can lack humanity. We also discuss the influences on his music made by his eclectic listening tastes growing up. Ultimately, we talk about how we stay connected to the humanity in our music making. So stick around for this conversation. This will, of course, be another installment of the Oxford Press series on the Choralosophy podcast, which is a brand new feature. Every 5 or 6 weeks or so, you're going to hear from more great Oxford composers and their stories and their philosophies. The Choralosophy podcast is entirely listener supported. You can support the show by choosing to use the promo code Choralosophy at one of our great vendors, which you'll hear about throughout the show, as well as going to patreon.com/Choralosophy, where you can get in the door for as little as $3 a month, get some extra content. There's a short podcast private feed there, as well as a bunch of supplemental materials. You get to find out who's coming on the show ahead of time. There's also a $5 and a $10 level where people can really make a contribution to the programming of this show. Now, the show will always be free, but it also takes a lot of work. And so people who enjoy the show and really feel that they are supporting the mission of the show can do that over at Patreon. And last but not least, you can support the show by sharing, by liking, by subscribing, by interacting on social media with the posts, because that helps me defeat Mark Zuckerberg and Twitter's massive algorithm fascism that they have going on there, where as soon as they sniff that I want you to see a post, they're going to bury my post so that you can't see it unless I pay them. And one way that you help me defeat the evil overlords of social media is to interact and share and like, because it helps crack the algorithm. So all those ways are the ways that listeners keep this show alive. So I hope you enjoy the conversation and stick around all the way to the end, because oftentimes on these hour-long conversations, my guests get more and more comfortable as they go, and it really starts to get fun and free by the end of the episode. So stick around and enjoy. All right, everyone. I'm here with Will Todd on the podcast. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things related to his concepts of how he hears music, how he creates music, and what its role really needs to be in our world. So, Will, welcome.
Very good to see you, Chris. Fantastic.
I'm excited to have you. And of course, I'm going to start out with probably the heaviest question right away, just coming out swinging. What's it like to live with two first names?
Well, yeah, good question. Although in the UK, you see, Todd is a pretty unusual name, right? So I didn't really kind of get this until I came to the States, where there's quite a lot of Todds, right? And people just started calling me Todd, you see. And I was like, this is fine, I didn't mind, you're doing stuff with people and we're all friends, it's all good. And then I realized sometimes people just kind of hear Will Todd and they think, well, it's Todd's a familiar name and Will's a familiar name, and they just pick one of them. So, as I say, it's been a kind of thing that has been revealed to me as I've worked more in the US.
Yes, of course. That's an interesting thing. I love to pick on the idiosyncrasies, I should say, of people's names. It's one of my favorite things. So, of course, my audience might not make this connection, and maybe you don't either. But the very first time we met was for ACDA in 2019 in Kansas City, and we got to collaborate, and that was such an awesome thing. But there's the other cool connection, I think, to that is that I had just started this show at that time. In fact, I planned to have my first episodes go on during ACDA. So the Choralosophy podcast was but a dream at that point. And so now we're full circle 2 years later.
I remember this very clearly because we did two wonderful performances of the Passion Music with your choir, Cantorai Kansas City, and it was Millie Nottingham sang, didn't she?
Yep.
Fantastic. And the second one, it was quite snowbound by then, wasn't it? We did the second one in a church. bitterly cold. And afterwards, with the choir, we went out for food. And I remember you telling me all about the podcast. And it was just in its infancy. You were just thinking about it. And wow, it has grown. I mean, it's only 2 years. And,
Yeah, it's pretty surreal, but yes, you're exactly right. You remember it exactly the way I remember it, and that the way that convention ended too is quite a story because of all the snow and people, sadly flying out away from the convention early, and a bunch of people missed your passion, which was a crime because my goodness, it's such a neat piece of music. So it just was so much fun to put that together.
wow. Well, it was fantastic for me, and of course, you put a huge amount of work in before I got there. You guys had learned the whole score. You rehearsed all your musicians. In a sense, I had the easiest job of all, which is that I arrived and kind of sat down at the piano, and everything was happening around me. But of course, the truth is, when you travel around to places, you don't know necessarily what your collaborators are going to be like if you've never met them before.
Mm-hmm.
And you assume the best of things, but you're ready for things maybe to not be perfect, and that's fine too. And I've been in plenty of those situations. But in all seriousness, it was such a joy. I remember we had that rehearsal in the church on the Friday night. Which was kind of like the moment of truth. It's like, I've spoken to Chris on the phone. I know the choir are great, but, how's it going to go? And we basically just played through the whole piece.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, this is going to be pretty joyous. It was fantastic.
Yeah, that's always the best way to do it. Okay, so enough about reminiscing in the past. Let's well, I guess I actually have a few more past questions for you, but let's start out actually with Little Will, going all the way back to your childhood. It's one of my favorite things to start out with one of these conversations. Why are you a musician, and where did that come from?
Okay, so Little Will grew up in a town called Durham in the northeast of England. It's a very pretty town, although it's actually in a very then industrial, now post-industrial part of the country in the northeast of the UK. But it has a beautiful cathedral there. It's a university town. That's where I grew up. And my family, I mean, I would say they were very musical in the sense they loved music, they listened to music, but they were not musicians at all. I do not come from a family of musicians. But there was this thing called a piano in the house when I was growing up. Not this piano, it was a German sort of Victorian German type thing, quite heavy action. And seemingly, the story goes that from about the age of 2, I was just gravitated to this thing, and I was just playing. And some of my earliest memories are being fascinated by the layout of the piano keyboard, because of course it's very nicely laid out. There are patterns, repeating patterns going up. And I guess I began to learn about the instrument by trial and error. I'm pressing notes, because it's easy to get notes out of a piano. You just press them, you get stuff, and you gradually learn stuff. Like if there's gaps between notes, you sort of get certain things. If notes are very adjacent, you get a different kind of a thing. And so, looking back on it, I realized I had this fantastic, I mean, everyone knows that we learn best when we're playing, right? When we're at play. I guess I combined this kind of joyous toy of the piano with beginning to think about sounds and how they go together. And pretty soon I was playing by ear, and I don't have any memory of not being able to play by ear. Which is I love that. It just means my sight reading's really, 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 really bad.
Do you feel like that's always been true, that you favored your ear, and as you learn to read music later, uh, have you continued to fall back on the ear as your primary learning tool?
Yeah, I mean, I actually learnt to read music in a choir.
Hmm.
So I went to sing in, my big sister learnt the piano, and there was plenty of music around, but I didn't really get to grips with it until I was in a choir. And you're singing, this was a Sunday choir, and we sang at a Sunday service and a Thursday rehearsal, and you're just looking at music going by, right? You're seeing these lines go by. So initially, when you're a young singer in a choir, you're probably doing most things by ear and kind of toning into the person next to you and copying. But quite quickly, you see this stuff going by, and of course that's fantastic because you begin to sort of trust the notation in front of you. So really my first immersion in written notation was singing, which I've continued to have a great love of course, through my life. Yeah, when I compose, I do find I have to kind of clear my mind, because obviously now, as a sort of trained musician, I have all sorts of abilities to analyze music and read music and think about music and the notation. But I still find when I'm at the start of a piece of music, I like to clear my mind and kind of explore the piano or sing and really try and just think sonically rather than technically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you are getting that first reading experience in choir, and you've got that piano by ear background already, where in the process for you, or just kind of give us the brief overview of where the formal training, where does young Will, maybe adolescent Will, start to decide, I want to dig into this even more? Where did that come from?
Okay, well, I think pretty much from about the age of 8 or 9, I was obsessed with the idea of writing music or creating music.
Oh, okay.
My choir director in my church was a good choral composer himself, and we sang quite a lot of music by him. And that was, that was very important because it normalized the writing of music to me. Oh, this guy would turn up with a new piece, and we would learn it, and it had been written by him. So, quite quickly, I was thinking in terms of, I want to write music, I want to learn how to do it. And in fact, my choir director, he was a guy called David Higgins, was my first harmony and composition tutor. So I think I had lessons with him from about age 13, combining a kind of formal harmony and counterpoint type approach, so sort of Bach chorale and 4-part harmony, with free composition. So each session he would set me something, a text to set, and I would work on that, and then we would look through it together. He was a really great teacher, actually, really great.
Now, did you eventually study at the university level and continue to study music, or did you do other things?
No, sure. So I went on through secondary school in our system here in the UK, and then specialised in music at university. I went to Bristol University in the southwest of England, where I did a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in composition. That was an interesting course because it was quite a sort of old style course in a way. I mean, this is in 1988. I'm going in there, leaving in 93. There were courses in the UK that were much more into fusion musics, but Bristol was not one of them. So one of the interesting things that happened to me is that I got into this kind of collision with my tutors about my kind of jazz playing side of my musical personality and what they like to think of as my sort of classical or real side.
Yeah, right.
And I was experimenting then with trying to think, how can I use a jazz trio in a classical piece and stuff like this. And they were great. I mean, they were great guys, but they didn't get it, that side of it. And their tendency was to say to me, leave out any of the jazz or any of the pop style stuff that you're interested in. Looking back on it, that's a kind of bit of a sadness to me. I mean, I've gotten through, but I like the fact that nowadays, even at Bristol University, the course would be much more open to fusions, and you're putting things in, and you might do some stuff in a studio way and then some stuff in a live way. These are all the tools that composers use now, and they need to.
Right, absolutely. That makes sense. And the reason I'm grilling you a little bit about the education side, because whenever I speak to a Brit about this topic, it's always interesting to kind of compare and contrast the US system for how we do music education and what's going on in the UK for music education, because I could be oversimplifying this, so here's my understanding, and you just tell me if it's wrong. Of course, there are kind of in the chapel system in the UK, and some like just choral singers who are trained to ultimately to be among the best in the world, like just absolutely professional in ways that many American choirs would only dream to be able to achieve. But on the flip side of that, music, maybe in a broader based societal structure, almost all of our kids can be exposed to music with quality education all the time. We just maybe don't funnel them to that upper echelon. So there's like a little bit of a it's which problem would you rather have, kind of a thing, where do you want music to be accessible to every kid who wants to have music education, or do you want to be the best in the world, or is there a way to have the best of those both worlds? So how would you describe how kids access music where you are?
Well, it's a fascinating question. Just put it slightly in context. If you go back to when I first learnt music, once I was learning instruments and things, and this was in my school ages, so say from age 10 through to 17, 18, I was learning music through a system here which we would call the county music, or the music service, which would be a county-based music hub idea where peripatetic teachers would go into the public schools and teach students. And there's a strong legacy of working class children who became professional musicians in the 70s and 80s, and who are now towards the end of their careers in major orchestras. And I'm afraid to say in this country we've gone backwards from that point. Because the cherishing of that, which I believe in massively, and I still work for one of the music trusts here in the UK, is very important, because it is what you're describing, which is that a wide variety of students are exposed to music, and therefore the options exist to take music much further as a career. But B, just as importantly, these people have a kind of an early love of doing musical things, and a belief that they can do musical things. So maybe they'll do things through their adult life with their own kids, which will perpetuate a musical society. And that's so valuable, right? That's so valuable to me and to all of us, and I'm sure to you too.
Yeah.
Now, the elite choral singer is an interesting one, because it arises out of all sorts of rather British things. You will know, of course, that we have quite a strong two-tier education system in the UK. 93% of our students are educated in state schools, which for you would be public schools. And the other 7% are in independent schools, fee-paying schools, in which there tends to be the chapel tradition. And if you analyse the elite choral singers of the UK, what you will find is that about 90% of them come from those school backgrounds.
Right.
Where there is a really strong tradition of the sort of the chapel music from their adolescent time going through. They also often feed from cathedral schools, where they've been choristers trained in the cathedral as trebles or as young voices, then going into an independent school with a strong chapel tradition and continuing these choral skills. So by the time they're 18 and they're applying to places like Oxford and Cambridge, which have very strong chapel traditions, they're not the only universities in the UK which do, but they're very well known for it. You have these very accomplished reading singers. They can read really well. They've done a lot of repertoire. They're used to performing with virtually no rehearsal. Just kind of, here's the music, we're singing it now. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that creates these phenomenal singers, and I mean, I love them. They're great, because you hand them scores, and their first read through will be, I mean, on that Tenebrae disc, which has my Lord Has Come on it, my carol, My Lord Has Come. I know that some of the takes that are used, some bits of that are from the first read through that they had, and the mics were on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's actually made it to the final disc, just the read through, bits of the read through. It's interesting though, because I get, it's a joy. I get to perform quite often with these kind of singers now. I sometimes have to work quite hard to get them to come out of the page and perform as human beings. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
You know,
I've heard that. Mm-hmm.
it can be tough. They are very used to, as I say, that they learn their craft singing in services, where in a sense we're not doing a performance as such because it's part of liturgy and worship. And then they become singers who are doing performances. And I'm always trying to say to them, come on, give me some humanity. I mean, I use better words than that, Chris, because if you say that to people, that would just offend them, clearly. But you know what I mean? One of the joys of singing is that it is human beings breathing in and then making notes. And in one sense, that transcends the quality of the notes, doesn't it? Because you can be in front of a primary grade group and they sing a piece really as well as they can, and it moves you to tears. But there's no sort of perfection to it, is there? But there's a very high dose of humanity in it. So what I'm always striving to do with those elite singers is try and just, you can do all the singing, it's great. Now I just want you to touch my heart. Do you know what I mean?
Have you renewed your Sight Reading Factory membership yet this year for you and all of your students? If not, get started. It's not ever too late, in my opinion, to give your students the gift of confident literacy and the empowerment that brings. It's amazing what happens when you really start to see the growth and you see that confidence build in their eyes. You can always use Choralosophy at checkout to get 10% off your whole order. For a school's order, that's a big savings, and you can use that code every time you renew each school year. And a special thanks, as always, to the Patreon producers: Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Kyle Peterson, Michael Heron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Yeah, and that's interesting because I teach in what we call public school, so taxpayer funded. We have a large choral program, and we focus heavily on literacy. And my kids, definitely not at the level of a professional London choral singer, but for the most part can pick up any choral piece of choral music and sing it on the first read. And that has actually, I've noticed over the years, because as a teacher, I've gotten better at getting kids to be able to do that over 18 years, and I've perfected my methods. But one of the things that I've noticed is the better the readers get, the harder it is for me to get them to connect emotionally. I have to work harder to get them to that point, because they get this place in their mind. Well, I sang from the beginning and I sang to the end, and it was all correct. We're done. There is no other thing, because I've done it correctly. I sang the right vowel, I sang the right note, and I sang it at the right time. And getting them past that, and memorizing even the music and putting it down, and just let's have an experience. We can still do it, but it's harder.
That's really interesting that you say that, because that kind of bears out what I observe and what I think goes on, which is that as we become better readers of stuff, we can become less good, if we're not careful,
right,
at actually performing the thing. It's almost, I sometimes use the phrase, are we hiding behind the notes? Are we hiding in the music and saying, yeah, I got the whole measure was correct,
yeah.
right? But of course, we also know that some of the most profound music making is a little bit rough at the edges at times, a little bit edgy. Things happen, perfection. What is it? Clearly there are things which sound awful, but on the other hand, there are things which sort of just resound with energy, and that's hard to do off the notes alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good reason we call them notes. They are the notes, not the experience.
Right. It's not the sheet. The sheet is not the music. It's just a picture of the music.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to, for me, that's why when I'm at my creative starting point always, is I tend to do things like try and imagine I'm in a big choral space, if it's a choral piece that I'm working on, and sort of get the sense of the atmosphere, and then just start trying to almost hear sounds, sort of hear them coming to me, rather than trying to kind of force my way into it from a technique point of view. I mean, technique's a brilliant thing, isn't it? And isn't it fantastic that you train your kids to do this, because it's such a great skill. But you're right. We have to have both. That's right. The thing.
Yeah, and I feel like, and I'm going to kind of share with you what I think causes some of our problems on this side, and I'm going to ask you a question about the same thing over there, which is that, for example, like I said, I can get 18-year-old kids by the time they're done with me. They leave me at about age 18 usually, and they are reading really, really well, usually singing with some pretty darn good adult sounding vocal technique by that point. But one of the things that causes us, I think, on this side to not have that same concentration at the upper echelon, maybe that London would, is that I kind of put it as a cultural problem, where we just don't think of choral singing as something grown-ups do. We think of it as something that kids do and old people. So like somehow magically, like you up to you're 18, and then you should stop singing in a choir, and then maybe when you're old again, you could sing in your church choir. Now, in reality, that's not what happens. But as far as thinking of it as a professional thing, now, of course, people who are listening to this, who are choir nerds, they're going to think, well, I think of it as a professional thing, but I'm talking about society, like our broader culture. And so we kind of lose those prime years where maybe somebody in their vocal prime from age 22 or 3 to 35, 36, 37, they're oftentimes, they might have learned those skills in school with me, but then they just don't use them, which is one of the interesting things. And so over there, you talked about how that upper echelon gets to be typically having those experiences. What causes that, and how would, if you were king of England tomorrow, that's a joke, obviously you don't get to, but if you were in charge, how do you fix that?
You mean how do we perpetuate these singers post 18?
No, I was just, I mean, we could talk about that. I was thinking more in the British context of, you were talking about that high concentration of how only those,
yeah, sure,
those certain schools get access to that.
Yeah, there are some great initiatives that kind of go against that flow. There's the National Youth Choir of Great Britain, which with Ben Parry, who really work hard to kind of reverse that trend and sort of be going out there and trying to make sure that kids from a wide and diverse range of backgrounds will come in and continue their singing beyond maybe a county youth choir or a school youth choir, through to a high level, and they nurture all of those skills that you're talking about, the reading, also the performance. They also do a very good thing with National Youth Choir of Great Britain, which is that they have a lot of training for people, young singers, to become leaders and animateurs, which I think is a role that the elite choral singer in the UK is beginning to realise is a really important part of making you a rounded musician. Not just that you can sing a perfect Stamford in C in St Paul's Cathedral on a Thursday afternoon, but also can you go into a room of people and inspire them to sing as well, and kind of transmit your joy and your skill. I think it's a lack. What it is here is that the kind of program that you head up in your school doesn't really exist in the UK. It just doesn't happen. There is not. I mean, obviously, I've had the pleasure of visiting quite a lot of high schools in the US over the years. And I'm always blown away by the fact that I go in and at 9 o'clock or whatever it is, a group of varied students who are also doing other subjects with other interests arrive in lesson time to do choral activity,
Mm-hmm.
right? That does not happen in the UK. That you can't be doing choral music during what we would call here national curriculum time. So from 8:30 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, that is national curriculum time. You could learn A-level music in that time as an academic study, but you could not spend that time running a choir.
Now, what is A-level music?
Sorry, A-level music is our higher level, so 17, 18-year-olds. It's the final exams we do in our secondary school system,
Mm-hmm.
um, where we tend to specialise down to 3 subjects at that point. So from age 16, you only study 3 subjects, one of which you will probably choose to take and do as a university course when you're 18. Um, so what happens in your school does not happen in the UK. It cannot happen. So any choir has to happen in a half-hour lunch break or after school, which may, that may work for some students, but not for others. But it's already. Do you see what I mean? It's
Right.
already low. It's already of lower value,
Yeah.
because we're saying what's happening there is we're saying these children have decided they're going to do choral, and they're going to get a credit for, they'll be accredited for doing this. They will achieve something.
Yeah.
Uh, it's rewarded, and that's fantastic. But here, that just doesn't happen, and that's a fundamental difference.
That's interesting. So the way it works in most US schools is that in order to graduate from the public school system, a student between age 14 and 18, or approximately, would have to have at least one full year of what we call a fine arts credit,
Right.
which means, and that would be the bare minimum. So what oftentimes happens is they'll choose to take choir in their 9th grade, which is their first year at my school. And because they think they're going to get their fine arts credit out of the way, and then they'll go take real classes. But then I convince them that it's awesome and they stay.
Right.
And so then and that's how that usually works. And then, next year we just got done doing our auditions for my most advanced class during the school day. And I've got 105 kids in there, balanced soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And because then they're allowed to take up to 9 electives over the course of the time they're in school. And so once I convince them that choir should be 4 of those electives, then I can get them to stick with a program. By the time they're 18, they graduate with all these skills, and but then again, then they stop using them.
Right. Which is so what's happening there is you've brought them on. You've brought them on with their skills, with their enthusiasm, with their confidence,
Mm-hmm.
and their knowledge, and then they're kind of being lost, or there is a sense that you don't carry this thing on.
Yeah.
I mean, that would happen in the UK as well. Even at the elite end, there would be plenty of those people who had a strong choral training through secondary school time who wouldn't do any more choral music.
Right.
There would be a fall off, I guess. People end up making choices about how they're going to spend their time, and they might decide that choir is not one of them. I don't know. Hard for us to say, Chris, because we love choir.
Right. It's why can't everyone just see it like we do? The world would be so much better. Yeah, no, it's fascinating to me, because I one of the things that I see when I think about your system and of course the well-known musicians from the UK that well-known in the choral world, oftentimes have had a path through music education that is so different than a well-known American choral musician who would have come through a system more like mine, where they were taught it at the secondary school level, and they went on to university, became a specialized degree or advanced degree in choral conducting of some kind. Whereas it seems like the way to become a successful musician in the UK is a little bit more narrow. It's like threading the needle to be. But you're an interesting case, because you kind of buck that trend a little bit.
I do. I wasn't a chorister in a cathedral, which is quite a common, route for people who end up in choral music. As I say, I was in a very good church choir, which definitely helped me with that. And also, of course, I was interested and did a lot of kind of rock music and jazz things, as well as playing classical music in my teens. So I always had this very wide base to what I was interested in and what I wanted to do. You know, and you know, at times you can feel slightly like an outsider to that. You know, it's like all kind of worlds. They have their secret auras to them almost. I mean, obviously I do lots and lots of work in British choral music, so I never feel unwelcome, but I sometimes think I haven't had the same experience as everyone I'm in the room with.
Yeah. Now, where did that eclectic music taste, kind of shifting gears now, but where did that eclectic music taste come from in your background? With, if you're doing piano at the, by ear and then church choir, but where does the rock and the jazz and all the other stuff you like come from?
Yeah, well, the thing is, when I was growing up, in the house I grew up in, so I have two older sisters, and my mum and dad. Obviously, between them, they listened to an incredibly broad range of music. My mum and dad used to love listening to opera. They used to have records, LPs of opera. But my dad also had a big jazz collection. They loved folk music that they used to play records of. My mum loved Radio 2, which is like a kind of lighter program here, kind of a sort of older pop music channel that would be on in the day. My sisters loved like concept rock artists from the 1970s. So there were these. Now the thing is, I thought this spectrum was completely normal, right? Completely normal that you would listen to a Beethoven symphony and then you would listen to Quadrophenia by The Who, right? That just seemed, well, of course you would, because they're both great, right?
Yeah.
And then I remember getting up to secondary school, which here would be starting aged 11, and you're starting to get into that time when people are sort of very much talking about the music they listen to and defining themselves by it. And I began to be conscious that lots of my peers were like, they were just like one band.
Mm-hmm.
Like one band. I like this band, but not this band. I was like, whoa, this is weird. So it kind of, I guess, something that my parents always felt very strongly about with all of the arts was don't discount anything. Again, that my dad taught at the university in Durham. He taught English literature. But his reading would go from Chaucer and Shakespeare through to thriller novels and crime. Because his point was, you read different books at different times. You're in different moods. Sometimes you want something very sort of deep and learned. Sometimes you want something more fast-paced.
Right.
And so with that, again, I wasn't conscious of it then, but I've sort of since analysed it back. What that gave us was a sense, don't prejudge something. Listen to it or read it and then decide if you enjoy it. And I think it's, there's still a danger, isn't there, that as people and as a society, we either get too frightened to look outside these narrow things or something. But, there's so much great stuff around, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting is that that's all kind of all those eclectic tastes that you've had throughout your life have played a big role in your composing career. Those influences in jazz and in your choral compositions, even, and like the passion that I did with you, and it would be hard to separate those or that, I guess, from your background to what you're doing now. And so what I would like to do, if it's okay, and kind of we're going to shift gears one more time to kind of another big overarching topic, which is more specifically now your choral music. I am really excited to tell you guys about mymusicfolders.com. Of course, there is the Resonant Singer's Mask, which is making a lot of really high quality singing possible right now during the pandemic, and it looks like we're going to need them still for a while. So make sure you head over to mymusicfolders.com and grab your choir a set of those. And then while you're there, especially as things return to more normal, you might find all kinds of other things that you need. Your choir folders, mymusicfolders.com, obviously, it's right there in the name. But then there's also mychoirrobes.com, which is a partner website where you can get really inexpensive and high-quality choir robes, which is a non-gendered solution for your choir uniforms. And the beautiful thing about this is when you're making a purchase for your entire school, you can enter Choralosophy at checkout to get a 5% discount, which on a school-sized order, that's hundreds of dollars oftentimes in savings. So I recommend you head over to mymusicfolders.com and or mychoirrobes.com and use Choralosophy at checkout. But thinking about your choral music and maybe even sharing with us how you create a piece. Like, what is your process? What's the first thing to go onto the paper, or is it the first thing is sitting at the keyboard playing? And you mentioned earlier you just like to feel the sound and sing through things. Is that how it all starts?
Yeah, there's a few different things that happen, and it slightly depends on what the reasons were for the piece coming about. So there's a difference between someone commissioning you and saying, would you consider setting this poem, a specific thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you might say yes, if it's a nice poem and you like it, in which case you've already had, there's already a fixed point, which is the text, it exists. In that situation, what I always do is I have the text up on the keyboard, and I'll read it and read it and read it, and I'll just sort of play chords. And there's no particular plan, and that is on purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to start to respond to this text in a musical way, but without getting too specific at that point. And what I'm waiting for then is a moment when it's always the same kind of thing. I'll move from one chord to another, or I'll sing a little phrase or shape, and I will suddenly start to think that is the right thing. That's the right direction for this piece. It's like a tiny little hook into the piece. So it could just be a phrase, da, 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 say, and I'll be singing the text, go, yeah. And once I have that kind of little way in, then I get a bit more conscious about it, and I'll start applying a bit more technique to it. So, I might start thinking, well, this is in F minor, so maybe I could move to these keys. And I'll start to sketch out. I like using these big sheets of manuscript paper, so I can literally just sketch all over them. It's pretty messy. When I die, Chris, no one is going to be able to work out what I meant from these things, right? So, but I kind of know what they mean.
So there will be no Will Todd's unfinished symphony.
Well, it'll stay unfinished. That's the point. So I'll do that, and I think then there's a point when I start to sketch physically here. And I start to kind of apply a bit more of my kind of theoretical brain. Mm-hmm. But I'm still, finding chords or singing them and just sketching them out. And I try as much as possible in that first bit. Everyone's different about this, but for me, it's very important not to worry about whether anything that I'm writing down is going to make it into the final piece. I just find that puts bad energy on it. It's like I'm just on a journey to search my way through the text and find the way through the shape. Now, there's a slightly different method that sometimes happens, and that's when I'm writing my own words. And as you know, several of quite a lot of my pieces, and quite a few with Oxford are with my own texts. And there, it's similar, but I think I'm drawing a little bit more on my kind of singer-songwriter bit, which in my adolescent years I wrote loads of, oh my goodness, Chris, the heartbreak songs I wrote between about age 14 to 18. Oh, the people who didn't love me.
Right.
You wouldn't believe it.
Well,
Album after album.
I have a book of poetry that should never see the light of day. Very similar. Yeah.
So in that sense, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Then I try and just focus down and sort of get into this rather personal space. I sometimes think about My Lord Has Come is a good example. I was just thinking about Christmas music, writing a Christmas piece. I imagine myself sort of in Durham Cathedral, because it's a space I know very well from my childhood. I've done lots of concerts there. It's very big acoustic. And I was literally sat here and thinking about drones, you know, setting up some kind of a drone. So I was just playing the drone of that piece, which is an open G and a D. And thinking about plain song, I found myself playing stroke singing this,
Mm-hmm.
and a moment, right, a notice on the rise, because I'm thinking about a big acoustic, that fourth to third is going to smudge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I suddenly thought, whoa, that's nice. And I don't really notice this when I'm first doing it, but what I'm doing is I'm singing words that don't really make sense. So I can't remember exactly what I would have been singing, but I'd have been singing something like shepherds and angels, you know, just kind of filling in words, kind of riffing with words.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the way in on that piece. And then I continued to write it like you would write a song, where the words and the tune kept on kind of emerging at the same speed. So the words and lyrics happened simultaneously.
Right.
And that's, I mean, in a way, that's my favourite way of working, because it feels very sort of real and genuine. It sort of seems to come from quite close within somehow. What I have to say, though, is very important to remember is sometimes when I'm trying to write a commission, I could go 3 or 4 days having ideas all day long and reject every single one of them, because somehow I just, what is inspiration? Who knows? But it doesn't seem to strike. I mean, I'm showing you that example of My Lord Has Come. It was just one of those lovely things. It kind of just appeared almost, you know. But you also have days when that really doesn't happen, and that's, you know, very frustrating.
Yeah. Do you feel like maybe there's a little bit of a filter on your mind when you're working on a commission for someone else versus or with a poem that's already set, for example, and when you're doing both simultaneously, it's a blank canvas?
That is spot on. When you're being the songwriter version, you know, where the lyrics and the whole piece is just coming along, you do feel freer. Yeah. Because you can make twists and turns that obviously, if the poem exists already, that's not quite the same. Having said that, there's another joy that comes from pre-existing words, which is that their beauty and their shape can really inspire you and make you see a musical shape. Because, you know, you read a lovely piece of poetry and it'll lead towards certain words. Mm-hmm. You'll find yourself thinking, you know, I want my big chord change to happen at a certain point, and it's on that word. And you so pre-existing poetry can give you points to aim at. Right. Which is exciting. The most difficult thing, I think, is setting words that don't mean very much to you. And I do try, you know, if someone suggests a poem and I for whatever reason, struggle with it. Struggle with it musically. I mean, because often a piece of poetry might be a great piece of poetry, but somehow doesn't suggest music. Do you know what I mean? And if that happens, I've learned that you're best off saying, you know what, I don't think that's going to work for me. You know?
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about a little bit about some of your specific works that people should kind of look out for. And so I have a kind of a weird question to ask composers, but I love this question, which is, what's one of your pieces that someone could find, it's published, it's out there, somebody could find it, that you really like, but doesn't sell very well?
Oh gosh, well, there's so much, Chris. Clearly, that falls into that category. There's a number of smaller. I call them jazz choral suites. These are pieces. There's one called "Songs of Love," for example, written for Elena Sharkova, one of her choirs in California. These are kind of 3-movement pieces for choir and piano trio, or piano trio and sax. Songs of Love is one of them, and I'm actually going to be doing it at St Martin in the Fields in a couple of weeks for a live record thing. I really like it. I think it's one of those pieces that just, when I do perform it with choirs, I just think, oh, this really works really nicely. One of the movements is on the Tenebrae disc, The Call of Wisdom, and it's the last track called I Sing Because.
Okay.
And that is the last movement of the Songs of Love. So that's a definite one that I sort of would like people to do.
Yeah. Now, are those Oxford, I'm assuming?
Of course, I realise I've really messed up there because they're with Boozy and Hawks, of course.
Oh no,
So
that's okay. We're allowed. Yeah, we're allowed to talk about anything. What about things that you, um, kind of going to the other direction of that question? What would you say is your most popular thing, like that people just resonate with right away?
My Lord Has Come. I've had more conversations with strangers about that piece than any other piece. You know, if I go to ACDA and I'm walking around, and which is always an amazing experience because there's so many amazing practitioners and composers and conductors, but lots of people will come up to me and say, "Oh, Will, it's so great to meet you. You know, we sang My Lord Has Come." You know, that's the one that people kind of seem to know more than anything else. Interesting about that piece, when I first kind of sketched it down, I was writing it with these quite rich chords, and I wrote the original setting of that in kind of 6/7 parts all the way through, right? So I was getting these nice type chords, you know, shimmering chords. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to really push myself to try and do this as much as possible in 4 parts, because I know that 4 parts makes it much more available to many more choirs.
Right.
And also, I just wanted to prove to myself that I could do something like this in a simpler way than I thought, right? Because in a way, it's easy to make a nice chord in 8 parts. I mean, it's not easy, but you get very rich sounds in 8 parts within a sort of diatonic thing, okay?
Yep.
So you get these very rich sounds. Whereas if you strip that back to 4, you have to make a lot of choices, A, about the notes you miss out, and B, exactly how you will space all these notes. So I stripped the whole thing out down to 4 parts, apart from, I think there's a divisi at the end. That interests me that piece has been so successful, because I think really great choirs, you know, they enjoy singing in 4 parts, even though they can sing in 8 parts and more. It doesn't mean they don't want to sing in 4 parts, right? So they can sing this piece and really enjoy making a beautiful sound. But for choirs for whom 8 parts or 7 parts could be a real struggle, it's made the piece more available. So something I say quite often to young composers is, writing in eight parts is fantastic, and you do that, but also think about writing in less than 8 parts, because that's
Right.
powerful too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've digressed. Oh no, you were asking me. So that is the piece that people probably know the most. The other one, of course, is Mass in Blue, which is very well known, and again something of a surprise to me from when it was first performed, that it has become as well known as it has, because I was kind of convinced that everyone would hate it. I mean, I actually said to a friend before the premiere in 2003, I said, no one is going to like this piece. And I mean, he knows me. He knows I always get cranky before performances, right? Before first performances.
Mm-hmm.
But he said to me afterwards, he said, even by your standards, Will, you had a big downer on this piece. And I was just saying, no one's going to like it. Everyone's going to hate this piece. No one will ever do it again. And that piece has been very, very successful. So that's given me loads of joy, of course.
Yeah, that's wonderful. The reason I kind of phrase those questions as a dichotomy, I guess, is that I'm always interested, as a non-composer, I'm always interested in asking composers questions like that, because I'm interested in the concept that you, as a creative artist, creating something, might fall in love with something, but then find the audience to not really appreciate it, and then the vice versa might also occur, where you could create something that you're just like, it's all right, but then the audience might love it, because it's so hard to predict. What you might like might not correlate with what they do. You know what I mean?
No, it's absolutely true. And there's a piece which no one has heard of mine. It's incredibly rarely performed. It's my Requiem for voices and electric guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a work for rock guitarist. I mean, they don't just play huge rock sounds, they play really soft. So it's using every possible colour of the electric guitar, with chamber choir, and there's a soprano soloist as well. And it's a very sort of uncompromising work in the way it sets the Requiem text. It's highly atonal in parts, I mean brutally atonal and dissonance in sections, very diatonic in others. Many of my closest musical friends and colleagues say this is the best piece you have written by such a large margin. But I struggle with this piece. I find it quite confrontational. I find it's so dramatic, going from huge sort of guitar noise down to tiny bell-like sounds with soft 8-part chords. It's like a roller coaster, and I sometimes think, who the hell wrote that, right? But it proves the point, I think, which is what you're saying, which is that composers, we're not necessarily the best judges of what we've done, and we do rely on the audience. And whenever that piece has been performed, audiences are very moved and sort of stunned by it. So I guess something works in it.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I love it, and I'm a big fan of your music, and I really appreciate the eclectic mix of how it's hard to pin down what style I'm in at any given moment, and that's good, because I think music needs to transcend some labels in order for it to continue to grow and thrive, and I think you're a great example of that. So let's wrap up with one more kind of concept. And it's really just kind of open-ended, things that you can think of, kind of being put on the spot here, that maybe the world of choir or classical music more broadly, should be talking about more. Like, what are you passionate about injecting to the conversation?
Well, it's inescapable, and I mean, I've noticed this all my life, the issue of diversity within what we might broadly call classical music.
Right.
It's a big topic here in the UK. I know it is in the US, and it's hard. It's something that can't happen by accident. You can't just wait for it to happen. You have to work hard to try and broaden the experience of music, the access to music. And also, what do we mean by classical music? If I use classical music as one example, I'll give you an example of a colleague friend of mine called Jasdeep Sedung, and he's a fantastic sitar player from the northern part of the UK, and he is, his tradition is the Indian classical tradition.
Mm-hmm.
I was fortunate enough to work with him, collaborating on a piece, and I was drawn into this incredible world, this entire world of Indian classical music, which, for example, there are many, many practitioners in this country, because we have a big Indian population here, Indian heritage population. It's hardly known about within broader classical music in this country. So that's just one example. I'm sort of saying there's so much stuff out there. It's very easy for us to sort of repeat the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah.
So, I'm part of a number of sort of forums with people trying to think about how to make sure we continue to strive to do that. Part of it is hard because you have to acknowledge first up that the thing you're doing is not the only thing that exists.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
by definition, we have to say, I feel very fortunate to have reached a good level in what I've always set out to do, which is sort of work with choral music and classical jazz crossover music. But this is one tiny thing. It's very important to me, and it's very important to a lot of people. But that doesn't mean we can't investigate other things, or indeed other things investigate us.
Mm-hmm.
It's a many-wayed street in that sense. So, from that background that I had listening to a wide range of music, I'm always trying to think, how can we broaden the access, broaden the experience? It can be a bit fearful. I mean, just using this sitar experience as one thing, it felt fearful starting to work with Jasdeep on this piece that we were doing, and I think it did vice versa for him. But we've had an amazing, few months kind of learning about each other's music, and we can't help being improved by that in all sorts of ways. So it's a bit generalised, that, isn't it? But I think the message I'm trying to get there is you have to take active steps to find the person that you don't yet know about.
Mm-hmm.
Passion music's a good example. Now, I know loads and loads of opera and jazz style singers, and I've worked with many of them over the years. The soul gospel world is not so much my world, but I knew that I wanted a soul style singer for this piece, and I had to go out and find people, and it was scary. I was getting in touch with music directors who I've never met before, who are people who do like gospel tours, right? And trying to explain what I'm looking for, and they're saying, well, and then finally Shanika came along, and we met up for the first time, and she's very nervous about this sort of classical composer, what does he want? And she's trying to sing all my music exactly right with all the exact pitches. And then there was this moment when I said, it was actually, my song is Love Unknown. My song is Love Unknown. And I was saying, Shanika, can we just try with you just singing this like you would sing this as if it was, a soul ballad? She started to do all this stuff. And I was like, yes, that is exactly what this is, And she's like, right, so you're not expecting me to be, and I'm saying no. So that was all a learning process, is what I mean. And I couldn't have, at the start of that project, I couldn't have looked through my sort of contacts and gone, oh yeah, there's my soul singer that I always use. I literally had to go and research and find someone, and there were various people on the way that sort of didn't happen or didn't work out, just that. So urging people to grow and widen.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when we put it on in Kansas City, I knew exactly who I wanted to find for that right away, because with Millie, but we did have some of that similar growing pain period where it took her a while to understand that she wasn't being asked to conform to a classical style. We wanted her because she already does what this piece calls for.
Right.
And so I
Right.
think what I think that's interesting is that it's so rare to have those worlds blended together that the musicians in question have that little, almost like you're sticking your foot into the swimming pool to make sure the water's okay before you just jump in. And maybe that's something that it's kind of a metaphor, but maybe that's our task as a music community, is to build a world where people are more willing to just jump in with each other, and maybe that takes a time, but it is does I agree, it has to be intentional.
And I think exactly, she was great, wasn't she? I
Mhm.
loved working with, and again, and she did it very differently to the way Shanika did it, which is again perfect because
Yep.
she did it the way that worked for her,
Yep.
and that was what I wanted with that piece. And as you say about dipping toes in water, by its very nature, when you go into new situations, we all feel vulnerable. I mean, of course you do. You sort of go into situations where you don't fully understand them and you feel vulnerable. But if you go into those situations and all the partners are in the right frame of mind, what you create and what you learn and the growth that happens for you all is very, very profound. So, if we can do it and when we can do it, I think it's really, really important.
That's great. I love it. Okay, so on the way out the door, let's make sure everybody knows how to find your stuff. Of course, there is a lot of you in the Oxford catalog, which is wonderful. But where are other places people can catch up with you and find out what you're up to musically?
Sure. Well, the website's the best place. The willtodd.co.uk website. And what's good about that is I have multi-publishers because I have lots with Oxford, which is great. I have a lot with Boozy and Hawkes. I also have my own publishing company, which is Talgan Press. But on my website, you can search the entire catalogue,
Hmm.
different categories, and you'll find all the works and where they're published and by whom, so you can find everything from that point. So if you're trying to find out other work, maybe one piece of upper voices choral music of mine, if you go to the website you can search upper voices and you'll find everything I've ever published and connect to whichever publishers that are required at that point.
And that's fantastic. And I'll make sure that information's in the show notes for people if they find this episode, next week, or if they find it months from now, they'll that access will be there. All
Thanks, Craig.
right. Well, thank you so much for spending an hour with me. This was fantastic. That's so much fun.
It has flown by.
Yeah.
Give my best wishes to everyone I know in Kansas City.
Yeah, it was nice catching up with you again.
Take care.
All right. See you later. Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of an episode. I hope you enjoyed that. I thought that was a lot of fun to have that conversation. It's actually one of the topics that I'm the most interested in kind of the choral specific education approaches that exist around the world, is to talk to Brits about how music is taught there versus what we are used to here. It really makes you start to think about the pros and cons of different ways of delivering music education. And I just think it's a fascinating topic. And it's probably one you'll hear me ask again anytime I get someone from that side of the pond on the show. So it's an interesting thing. But again, on the way out, I always would like to remind you that there are such great ways for you to help continue the mission of this show. Of course, hit up Choralosophy at checkout at any of the 5 affiliates of the show. That is vocevista.com/Choralosophy, where you can get the awesome resonance software imaging to use in your class, your private voice lessons. Don't forget, you can download that for free and play with it for 30 days before you buy the licensed version. Of course, Sight Reading Factory, Graphite Publishing, RyanMain.com, and MyMusicFolders.com all allow you to enter Choralosophy at checkout and get a coupon every time you purchase from one of those great vendors. And then, of course, last but not least, you are helping me defeat the evil algorithms, Al Gore and his rhythms, by sharing, by liking, by commenting, interacting in any way that you can, and of course, leaving ratings in those podcast apps. Thanks a lot, everyone. We'll see you next time.